My name is Plak Platt, and the day I was accused of destroying my own future, I did not shout, I did not curse, and I did not beg. I just sat there in silence and said, "Show me the evidence." Because sometimes the loudest person in the room is not the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest one is the person who can stay calm when the whole world is trying to push him into panic. And what happened to me was not a fight with fists. It was a fight with truth. It was a fight with contracts, emails, dates, records, and patience. And in the end, I defeated a man who had more money, more power, more connections, and more confidence than I ever had. Not by shouting, not by revenge, but by staying steady when everyone expected me to break. This is my story. It began in a city where people move fast and trust very little. I worked at a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio called Northgate Freight Solutions. It was not a glamorous place. It was not the kind of company that people bragged about at dinner. But to me, it meant everything. I had started there from the bottom. I was not born rich. I was not the son of a CEO. I was a regular man with worn shoes, early mornings, long hours, and a deep belief that if I kept doing the right thing, one day life would notice. For years, I was the man who stayed late to fix other people's mistakes. I was the one who checked numbers twice. I was the one who learned every system, every route, every policy, every clause hidden inside the fine print. People used to laugh at me because I never raised my voice. They said I was too quiet. They said I was too serious. They said a man like me would never survive in a hard business world. But I learned something early in life. Noise can impress people for a moment. Truth lasts longer. At Northgate, I became known as the man who could solve problems without drama. If a shipment went missing, I found it. If a client was angry, I calmed them down. If a report was wrong, I corrected it. If someone made a mistake, I fixed it without making them feel small. That was just how I was. I believed respect was stronger than fear. That belief would later save me. One winter, the company brought in a new executive named Victor Kane. Victor was the kind of man who smiled too much and trusted himself too easily. He wore expensive watches, spoke in sharp sentences, and made every room feel like a stage built for him. At first, people liked him because he sounded powerful. He talked about growth. He talked about expansion. He talked about winning. But after a while, I started noticing something. Victor did not care about truth. He cared about control. He wanted people who would clap when he spoke and agree when he lied. He did not like me from the beginning because I did not perform for him. I did my work. I answered honestly. I did not flatter him. That made me dangerous in his eyes. He thought quiet men were weak. He thought calm men were easy to break. He was wrong. The problem started with a contract worth $42 million. Northgate was trying to secure a major national shipping deal with a retail giant. If we won that contract, the company would grow fast. Jobs would be safe. People's futures would improve. I knew how much depended on it, so I worked day and night with my team, checking every number, every delivery term, every penalty clause, every timing detail. I built the proposal from the ground up. I remember sitting in my office long after midnight, the building so quiet I could hear the heater humming. My coffee had gone cold. My eyes were burning. But I kept going, because I knew this deal mattered. Victor Kane also worked on the deal, but he mostly worked on appearances. He gave speeches. He took credit. He smiled in meetings like the contract had already been won because of him. He liked to stand in front of everyone and say, "This company is moving forward because of strong leadership." He always said things like that. Strong leadership. Moving forward. Winning. But behind the scenes, he was careless, arrogant, and greedy. I saw the signs. I warned one of the senior directors. that some of the figures he was pushing did not match our verified costs. The director told me to keep my head down and let Victor handle the presentation. I did not argue. I just saved the emails. And that habit would matter later. On the morning of the final client presentation, everything changed. The client had received a version of our proposal with a pricing structure that was completely different from the version approved by our board. The altered version made us look dishonest and unprepared. The client was furious. The room went cold. Then Victor turned slowly and looked directly at me, and with a voice full of poison, he said, "Plak was responsible for the final file." I still remember the silence after he said it. It felt like the air had left the room. The client canceled the meeting. The board called an emergency review, and suddenly, I was not the trusted employee anymore. I was the suspect. Victor told everyone that I had sent the wrong version. He said I had been pushing too hard to get my work into places it did not belong. Those were his exact words. Pushing too hard. He made it sound like ambition was a crime. He made it sound like a man who wanted to move forward was somehow guilty just for trying. And the worst part was that some people believed him, not because they knew the truth, because his voice was louder than mine, because his confidence looked like power, because in a tense room, people often trust the person who speaks first, not the person who speaks best. That same afternoon, I was called into the boardroom. There were 7 people sitting there. 7 serious faces. 7 sets of eyes. And Victor Kane at the center, looking calm like he had already won. One board member asked me, "Did you send the altered proposal?" Victor leaned back in his chair and said nothing. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to defend myself badly. He wanted me emotional. He wanted me to look guilty. But I knew something very important. A man loses his power the moment he starts fighting on the other person's terms. So I took a breath and said, "No, I did not send it. And before anyone decides what happened, I want every email, timestamp, and access log reviewed." Victor smiled, not because he was innocent, because he thought I was weak. He said, "That's fine. We'll review everything." Then he added, "But if you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem cooperating." That sentence was meant to corner me. People love saying that. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem cooperating. It sounds fair. It sounds clean. But sometimes, it is just a weapon dressed like common sense. I nodded and said, "I'm cooperating right now." Then I left the room. I did not slam the door. I did not argue. I did not chase after anyone. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started building my defense. Now let me tell you something important. People think a battle is won in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it is, but most real battles are won in the small, quiet hours after the accusation, when the accused has to choose between emotion and discipline. That night, I worked in silence. I pulled every email I had sent for the last 3 months. I checked the version history of every file. I copied backup logs. I matched timestamps. I saved server records. I reviewed the document permissions. I found something strange, almost immediately. The altered proposal had not been modified from my account. It had been modified from Victor's assistant account. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I looked deeper. The file had been opened from Victor's private office computer at 9:14 p.m. while he was still in the building. The final version had been exported at 9:17 p.m. My account had no access at that time. And the most interesting part? Victor had personally approved an earlier cost structure that matched my original draft, which meant the incorrect proposal had been changed after his approval, not before it. I kept digging, and then I found the real bomb. There were internal messages between Victor and one of our competitors, a smaller firm that had somehow known our bid strategy before the final presentation. Not enough to accuse him outright. Not yet. but enough to prove that someone had leaked confidential information from inside the company. Now, I had two choices. I could go public immediately and risk looking reckless, or I could stay quiet and build a case so strong that nobody could twist it. I chose the second path, because calm is not weakness. Calm is control. The next morning, Victor called a meeting with me, HR, and two executives. He sat across from me and said, "We need to protect the company." That was his favorite phrase. Protect the company. People like Victor always hide behind words like that when they are protecting themselves. He continued, "It would be best if you resigned quietly. Resign quietly." There it was. No trial. No facts. No fairness. Just pressure. I looked at him and said, "You want me to leave before the truth is reviewed?" He smiled like he was doing me a favor. He said, "I want to avoid unnecessary damage." I remember looking around the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. That is one of the hardest parts of being accused. The room gets smaller. Even friends become careful. Even good people become silent because they are afraid of standing next to the wrong person. But I was not angry. I was disappointed. So I said, "I'm not resigning, and I'm not signing anything until the logs are reviewed." Victor's smile disappeared for just a second. Just 1 second. That was enough for me to know I had found something real. Fear had touched him. He recovered quickly and said, "Then we will proceed formally." And we did. Over the next 2 weeks, the company launched an internal investigation. Victor expected me to break under pressure. He expected sleepless nights, emotional outbursts, desperate calls, maybe even a lie or two. He got none of that. I gave them facts. Honnête be on. I printed the access logs. I showed the file history. I produced the backup emails. I brought in the approvals. I explained every timestamp in plain language. I did not talk like a lawyer. I talked like a man who understood the truth and was not afraid to repeat it. Still, Victor kept trying to paint me as ambitious, difficult, and overly eager to move up in the company. That was his strategy. He wanted to make the story about my personality instead of his actions. He told the board I was obsessed with climbing. He said I had become too focused on control. He implied that I had manipulated the proposal to make myself look important. It was a clever lie. Not because it was true, because it sounded possible, and that is how a lot of lies survive. Not through proof, through tone. But tone cannot survive against records. The company hired an outside legal auditor named Sarah Malloy. She was sharp, direct, and impossible to intimidate. She reviewed everything for 3 days. No speeches. No drama. Just facts. On the 4th day, she asked to meet me alone. When I sat down, she placed a folder on the table and said, "You were framed." I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I just nodded, because I had known it for days. She showed me the chain of edits. She showed me the export history. She showed me that Victor's assistant account had been used from Victor's office computer. Then she showed me something else. Victor had been sending confidential bid details to an outside contact for months. Not all at once. Just enough to gain advantage. Just enough to tilt the field. He had not only tried to make me look guilty, he had been using company secrets for his own leverage. That changed everything. The board called an emergency meeting. This time, Victor was not at the center of the room. I was. Not because I wanted the attention, because the facts required it. Sarah presented the findings clearly. Victor interrupted her twice. The chairman stopped him and said, "Let her finish." That was the first time I saw Victor lose control. He started talking faster. His voice got sharper. He pointed at me and said, "He's twisting this. He's trying to take me down because I've been leading this company forward." There was that phrase again, moving forward. He kept saying it because he thought it made him sound visionary. But in that moment, it sounded like an excuse. I finally spoke. Not loudly, just clearly. I said, "I'm not trying to take you down, Victor. Your own records did that." The room went still. I continued, "I came here to build this company. You came here to build yourself." That line landed hard. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Then I looked at the board and said, "I have no interest in revenge. I only want the facts treated fairly." That was the moment everything shifted. Because facts are cold. Facts do not care how charming a man is. Facts do not care how expensive his suit is. Facts do not care how many times he says the same lie with confidence. The truth was now in the room, and it was bigger than Victor's ego. The board voted to suspend him, immediately pending further legal action. That should have been the end of it. But Victor was not the type of man to go quietly. He tried one last move. He threatened to file a defamation claim against me if I continued cooperating with the investigation. He told people I was dangerous because I had access to systems and documents. He tried to turn my honesty into suspicion. But by then, too many eyes had seen too much. Too many records had been copied. Too many emails had been preserved. Too many timelines had been matched. So, I did something Victor never expected. I stayed calm in public. I let the legal team handle the process. I answered every question truthfully. I never insulted him. I never called him names. I never turned it into a personal war. Because I knew something he did not. When a man screams, he gives away his focus. When a man stays steady, he keeps his power. The legal review expanded into a formal investigation. The outside firm traced the leak to Victor's side channel. They found messages. They found unauthorized access. They found attempts to erase evidence. And when the full report came in, Victor Kane was removed from the company. Not because I shouted. Not because I humiliated him. Not because I played dirty. He was removed because truth had finally been allowed to stand in the same room as his lies. Maybe he did. Maybe he did not yet. But I hope he remembers it one day. Because life will test him too. It will test all of us. And when that day comes, he will need more than emotion. He will need backbone. He will need patience. He will need the kind of strength that does not need an audience. Looking back now, I do not remember Victor Kane as the man who nearly ruined my career. I remember him as proof that confidence is not the same as character. And I remember that boardroom, the silence, the accusations, the pressure, the long nights, the legal papers, the emails, the timestamps, the cold truth waiting in folders no one bothered to read at first. That was my battlefield. No punches, no shouting, no chaos, just a quiet war between ego and evidence won. So if you are watching this right now, and your life feels like my story did, listen to me carefully. Do not rush to scream. Do not let loud people force you into their kind of battle. Do not confuse patience with weakness. Do not think that staying calm means you are losing. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one who has already prepared the ending. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who will walk out with the truth. And sometimes the strongest victory is not when you break your enemy. It is when you defeat them with discipline, with facts, and with a heart that refuses to become ugly just because the world around it is. That is how I won. My name is Plak Platt, and I learned that a quiet man with the truth in his hands can be far more dangerous than a loud man with a lie in his mouth.